This is JD in the Sumpsea, and I'm Jay. Thanks for tuning in. In this episode, I'll be talking about a new Necromunda campaign that I'm running starting next week, Thursday, July 11th, and running every Thursday for 8 weeks at the newest game store in town, oldguardgames. There's a link in the description below. But first, I need to give a shout out to the YouTube channel Miniatures Rundown. They have a new video out called You Don't Need to Use Every Rule in Necromunda. Link in the description below. This video is great for anyone trying to run a Necromunda campaign. It has a lot of suggestions on what to use in your campaign and what not to use, because you don't actually have to use all of the rules that have been printed from the beginning, 2017 through now, for Necromunda. There's a lot of rules that are just unnecessary and overly complicated and that you don't need to use when running a Necromunda campaign. That video goes through the most problematic of rules and gives you good recommendations on what to do and what not to do. I used that video to inform some of my decisions that I'm talking about for my campaign in this video today. I'd also like to give a shout out to Commander Cheapskate. That channel has a lot of great videos about how to build Necromunda gangs. It also has a lot of videos about how to run different types of Necromunda campaigns. I've definitely taken inspiration from that channel, not only for gang building, but for running campaigns, and he's been making videos on that topic for a number of years now. So Commander Cheapskate, link in the description below. And if you like Necromunda content, things like terrain building and painting, gang building and painting, campaigns, battle reports, and more, make sure that you take out your Warhammer and smash that like button and smash that subscribe button, and don't forget to hit that bell icon and select all to make sure that you get updates from us every time we put out a new video. We really would appreciate it. It does help out the channel a lot. So this campaign will be a Dominion campaign as described in the core Necromunda rulebook. Only one game per week will be played per player, and that game will be played at the game store each Thursday. We'll be there by 6 p.m. and we'll have until 11 p.m. to play. I'll be the arbitrator of the campaign. I'll also be running a Chaos Helot cult gang that I made specifically for this campaign during the first 3 weeks and the second 3 weeks. During the downtime and during the final game of the campaign, I'll be running my nemesis that I created for this campaign along with his specific gang. No matter how well my gang does or how badly they do, I will not be earning any triumphs in this campaign. Also on Thursday, if there is an odd number of people at the store, I will sit out to allow someone else to play a game instead of me. Both Dale and myself will be able to assist people with the rules of Necromunda if they need them. We can be called upon to be the Necromunda rules gurus, as it were. So let's get into the campaign packet. Weeks 1 through 3 are the occupation phase. Week 1, the matchups will be random. I'll put people's names in a hat and draw out a random person who will pick a territory, and then a second person who will be picked to play them for that territory. Weeks 2 and 3 will be players challenging other players to play them for specific territories that are unoccupied, listed in the packet and shown on the map. The order of who picks a territory and then who they will play for that territory will be based on lowest gang rating, and then going up from there until everyone has a matchup. Downtime will be 1 or more games during week 4. The downtime game or games will be revealed on the downtime week. I'll be playing my special Nemesis gang in one of those games. These are optional games and will not be for a territory. After week 3's games are played, everyone in the campaign receives 250 credits. After week 4's downtime games are played, everyone will have all of their fighters who are in recovery recover and be available for week 5's game. Week 5, 6, and 7 are the takeover phase. During this portion of the campaign, players will challenge other players for territories that challenged player already controls. The winner of the game that week will take control of that territory. Week 8 is the final week and the final game of the campaign. Triumphs will be distributed before this game is played, so this game has no bearing on those titles. This is an optional game, and I will again be using my Nemesis gang in this game. A word on narrative. My Nemesis gang is pulling the strings behind certain events that are occurring in the Hive during this campaign. During the downtime in the final week's games, the Nemesis's influence will be felt. More on this as the campaign progresses. If you have come up with a background and story for your gang, and I highly recommend you do so, then you should try to either print out a sheet of paper with the story for your gang and give it to me, or share it with me through Discord or some other online method. I can weave your gang's stories in with my Nemesis's story, and we can make this a really fun campaign. Now let's talk about gang construction. Each player picks a gang, has 1,000 credits to spend on building that gang. At gang creation, you may include one hangers-on or brute. No vehicles are used in this campaign since we're playing within Hive Primus of Necromunda itself, and the boats in the Sump Sea will simply be used as terrain if they are encountered in a Sump Sea scenario. All gangs are allowed except Ash Waste Nomads. Bad Zone Enforcers are also allowed. They are found in White Dwarf 477. I'll go over how Enforcers interact with territories a little later on. Allies are allowed in this campaign, but I urge you not to use them if you don't need to. At gang creation, your gang must either be law-abiding or outlaw. Being outlaw or law-abiding influences the level access to different goods in the trading post, what happens if any of your gangers are captured, and what hangers-on and brutes you can hire. The only trading post items you will have access to are from the core rulebook, unless you also control the Port of Rust territory, which I'll talk about later. We will not be using any of the Apocrypha articles that have been released online at all. We will also not be using anything from the Aranthian campaign series of books, except for the one scenario, Parley Showdown, which I have included in the scenario packet, link in the description below. House Agents will not be used at all either. Tactics cards. There are 6 tactics cards we will not be using, and they are History of Violence, Dangerous Footing, Hive Tremor, Tainted Meat, Unnerving Whispers, and A Present for You. At gang creation, everyone picks 12 tactics cards that are legal for their gang to use, which will usually be cards from their house of book or from the main rulebook to build their deck. In the core rulebook on page 255 is a list of all the core gang tactics that are available to any and all gangs. You will always pick 2 tactics cards to use for a scenario regardless of what the scenario says, even underdog scenarios, which I'll talk about later. Downtime and the final scenario. I recommend you write down all the tactics cards you're using either on the gang roster sheet or on another piece of paper, and after using it, just mark that it has been used. If the tactics card was not used during the game you picked to use it for, it goes back into the deck available for you the next week. If a card is used, then it can't be used again until all of your other tactics cards have been used. Then all of the cards go back into your deck, and you have access to all of them again. So let's talk about Enforcers. Since Enforcers have been mentioned by many people in this campaign, I just want everyone to be on the same page when it comes to how they operate in a Dominion campaign. This refers to both regular Enforcers and the Bad Zone Enforcers. In the Book of Judgment on page 30, there's a box that describes how Enforcers operate in Dominion campaigns. They cannot occupy and control territories like other gangs, and they don't begin with a settlement. They instead start with a Palanite precinct territory. The Palanite Enforcers gain D6 times 10 credits each week from this territory when collecting income, and if they ever lose a battle fought on this territory, the opposing gang gets +5 reputation. When they challenge another gang, or if another gang challenges a Palanite Enforcer gang in the occupation phase, they fight for the territory as normal, but if the Enforcers win, then they can either perform a police territory or grant territory action after the battle. The police territory action means they control the territory but gain no boons from it. Instead, they gain D3 plus 1 rep. And every week they control the territory, they gain an additional D3 plus 1 rep. The grant territory action allows them to instead give the territory to another player. During the takeover phase, if the Enforcers challenge another player and a specific territory of theirs and then win, they perform the police territory or grant territory just as I described earlier. But if they're challenged during a takeover phase, then instead the game is played on their home ground, which is their Palanite precinct territory. They set up a Zone Mortalis board and all the doors are treated as locked by the attacking gang and unlocked by the Enforcers. The Enforcers also have home turf advantage rule during this game. Scenario selection. Each territory has a specific scenario attached to it. This territory, plus its attached scenario, will inform the players as to how to set up the terrain for their game that week. During the occupation phase, the scenario attached to a specific territory will always be used unless the player who picks the territory to be fought over is an underdog, or if they have a specific ability to manipulate scenario selection, or if they have a captured fighter who needs rescue. If they are an underdog, which is defined as being the player in the matchup with a gang whose gang rating is 400 or more credits below the gang rating of the other player's gang, then the underdog may select one of 3 underdog scenarios to play. I've included them in the scenario packet, which I will talk about later, and which is linked in the description below. If they have a specific ability to manipulate the scenario selection, then they may choose to play either the border dispute or the standoff scenario, both of which are in the scenario packet. If they have a fighter who is captured, they may challenge before anyone else gets to make a challenge the player who captured their fighter and play a rescue mission instead of challenging someone to play for control of a territory. The rescue mission is played in a Sector Mechanicus territory type. I will go over the territories and their territory types in a little bit. Scenario selection operates slightly differently during the takeover phase. While the underdog scenario selection rule and the captured fighters scenario selection rule and even the scenario manipulation rule remains in effect, an additional option is open to the players who controls the territory that's being fought over. A player who is challenged to play a game over control of a territory they own may select to play the standoff scenario instead of the one listed in the territory entry. This is to give the territory owner the ability to play a scenario that is different to the one they already played earlier in the campaign. Also, the territory owner has knowledge of the location, so they'd be better able to dictate where the battle would be fought. The territory type would remain the same as the territory that was being challenged regardless of which scenario would be played. After each game is played, players must follow the post-battle sequence on pages 142 to 147 in the core Necromunda rulebook. Underdog tactics cards are not used in this campaign. House patronage is not used in this campaign. House favors may be used if the player wants to, and that's on page 243 of the core rulebook. Resurrection packages are not used, rackets are not used, house subplots are not used, and intrigues are also not used in this campaign. Campaign triumphs. There are 5 triumphs, and each gang can only acquire one of the triumphs. If there are ties, then I will decide who gains what triumph. These triumphs will be awarded at the beginning of week 8 before we start the last optional game. The triumphs may be used by myself or another arbitrator in future campaigns. The in-game or in-campaign effects of these may be useful or not, at the arbitrator's discretion. As a note, the wealth of a gang is determined by adding the gang's rating to the cost of its war gear and weapons it may have in its stash, along with any unspent credits in its stash. Let's move along to territory types. There are 5 types of territories in this campaign. These types determine what type of battlefield and additional rules the games you play in those types add to the game. The first type of territory is the Sector Mechanicus. This is fairly straightforward and is a typical looking Underhive Necromunda board setup. Most of the terrain we will have available during the campaign weeks at the store will be compatible with this terrain type. It's 3-dimensional terrain with no special terrain rules. This type of board will be set up for play before each week of games begins. Zone Mortalis is the second type of territory, and this type uses the oldest type of terrain that this current version of Necromunda has ever had rules for. Zone Mortalis is essentially 2-dimensional. The walls are unclimbable and there is no elevation. The boards are set up as tiles by the 2 players before the game begins. The scenarios go more in depth as to how this works. There are also doors that are lockable and air ducts that have additional rules. There are also specific tactics cards that reference Zone Mortalis. If you have those cards, feel free to include them in your tactics cards deck. Just be aware you may never get to use them. The Sump Sea is another type of territory, and a scenario fought in the Sump Sea will include a large portion of the ground level being the Sump Sea, which if you fall into it could mean certain death. When falling into the Sump Sea, a fighter takes no damage and are placed where they're fallen. They can't take any actions, and when activated, the fighter must pass a strength test or go out of action. If the strength test is passed, the fighter swims up to their movement characteristic. If reaching a ladder or terrain piece, the fighter may climb to safety. Place the fighter closest to where they swam. These rules were first presented in the Book of Peril, and this is the book I am referencing with these rules. The Sump Sea may also include ships and boats, but these are treated as just terrain and cannot be interacted with. The fourth territory type is the Collapsed Dome, also from the Book of Peril. This board setup is like a regular Sector Mechanicus board, but has the following additional rules. When placing a blast marker before working out its effects, roll a d6. On a 5+, place another blast marker of the same size in contact with the first at a point determined by the scatter die. Work out the attack's effects under both blast markers. The next rule is, when going prone on a raised platform or other piece of raised terrain, pass an initiative test or fall as if you were within 1/2 inch of the edge. Doors and other structures with a toughness and wounds gain -2 toughness, minimum of 1. The Dome Jungle is the final type of territory, and the Stinger Mold Sprawl is the only territory to be within the Dome Jungle. This is a battlefield that should be 4 feet by 4 feet square. It is a large area to fight over because there are a large amount of dangerous flora out to kill the fighters involved. There will be special plant terrain pieces to use in this scenario, and the rules presented here for those plants should be used. If the players don't want to play with all 3 types of killer plants, that's okay, but they must use at least one type. Territories. Every player starts with a settlement territory, and it cannot be taken away from them. This is their base of operations, and they can use it to potentially recruit a new fighter each week. This first page is just 5 different Sector Mechanicus territories that can be fought over. Some of them suggest what terrain to play with, and they list the scenarios to be played as well. These boards will be the typical setups you've seen at the store if you've been there on a Thursday in the last month. Here's a picture of the type of setup these scenarios will be played on. The next page gets into gang-specific territories. These territories can be controlled by any gang, but if the specific gang that these territories mentions is controlling it, then they get the special bonuses listed. The control over these territories are fought over several different territory types. The last page of territories covers the other territory types that can be fought over. The last 2 pages of the packet show the results cards. Each player will fill out a results card at the end of each game they play and hand them in to either myself or Dale if I am not available. I'll update the campaign weekly on the Discord, and I'll update the map both at the store and on the Discord. Well, that's the campaign basics. As the campaign progresses, I'll make new videos. This could include gang profile videos, battle reports, arbitrator videos, and just campaign updates in general. So what do you think about this campaign? Is this something that you would run? How do you run your campaigns in your game group? Do you run things straight out of the book, or do you make up your own rules? Have you used some other supplements that other gaming groups have created, or have you created your own supplements for your own campaigns? I think the campaign mode is what sets Necromunda apart from a lot of other games out there. I think campaigning is the most interesting way to play Necromunda, and it is a more interesting way of playing a miniatures game than simply playing a one-off battle. And I've come to this conclusion since the new Necromunda has come out in 2017. I've played a lot of games, played in a number of campaigns, both ones that have lasted months and ones that have lasted only a day or 2. But that's all I've got for this time. Thanks again for watching, and as always, please like and subscribe.